According to Rabbi Yeshua, when he says tam is mevuar, doesn't mean he doesn't have an idea of tam, bichlal. That's impossible. Right? I mean, he doesn't hold by tam iser by chazer. I mean, that's ridiculous. Of course he does. So when he says tam is mevuar, he's talking in our sugya, meaning the tam of the min, which has been kalu. Okay? So when he does have tam, the tam he's referring to is the tam heter from the third min, which is not yet kalu. And he says that tam is in the first two min, just factually. Right? I think that's what he's saying. The machlokas of whether tam is mevayer or not is once a min is kalu and is now chayiv biur, does the tam from that min have a reality or not? But to say that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehuda don't hold by a concept of tam is ridiculous because tam shows up in lots of sugyas. When they say tam is mavur, they're just talking over here. Okay, so one of the guys asked, what does it mean tam is mavar? So okay, good, that's a good question. What are the options? What could it mean? Forget whether whatever it could mean is going to work out in the sugya. What are the options? Question is, when that min becomes chayiv in biur, what is the status of its tam? So according to those who hold tam as mavuar, its tam is destroyed, whatever that means. And according to the side that holds it's not mavuar, that tam is not destroyed, meaning you view it the same way you would view tam always. Yeah, go ahead.
Is tam a part of the destroying process?
No. So the thing is like this. I mean, this is part of what you need to figure out, but I think we're hitting this point, right? Tam mavuar. Well, think about it logically. Can it mean what you just suggested of it's part of the biur process? No, it can't mean that because everybody holds there's a chiyuv biur. Rabbi Eliezer, who doesn't hold tam as mavur, holds there's a chiyuv biur. So that can't be what the idea of tam as mavur means. Okay? So what does it mean? So descriptively, it's saying the tam is as if it's destroyed. Tam is mavur. It's destroyed already. I'm saying that if you just think about what the options are, that's why I presented it to you that way. What are the options for what this could mean? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, good. So Yaakov is suggesting two possibilities for tam mavur. He's saying logically you could either say tam mavur means the tam is there, but what?
But the Yisr is no longer applies?
But the Yisr no longer applies, the chiyuv biur no longer applies, or it's as if the tam isn't there at all. Okay, good. Those are two logical possibilities. We have to see which one of those works. Okay, good. Tamir is raising a third possibility. Maybe you say tam mavur means that the tam of a min, after it becomes chayiv biur, is a new kind of tam. Meaning even though if you were to taste it, it's still apple or whatever, okay? You're not going to taste the difference. It's the same biological thing, right? But halacha doesn't view the tam, which is, so to speak, emanating from the apple after biur, as to be the same tam as that which was coming out of that apple before biur. It has a new status. That's another possibility. It's good because you guys are fleshing out what the possibilities are. Right, which is an important first step because you can't worry necessarily about whether a possibility is going to work out to solve all the problems in the sugya at the very beginning. You first have to say, well, what are my options? Right? How is it possible to even understand the facts? And then you can start saying, either on an intuitive basis or by actually plugging it in and seeing, does this check out? You know, and then you can start discarding things. Oh, there are three possibilities for time of war. Well, let's plug it in. Well, possibility number one doesn't work. Okay, what about possibility number two? Now you're already going. Right, so that's a good methodological step. And right now, we already have three possibilities. Okay, but the question again that we want to get to is what's the machlokas? So we have to settle on one of these ideas for time of war, whether it means the time is considered to no longer exist, or it exists but it's no longer the status of Isser, or whether it's this idea that it's a new kind of a tam because it's coming from a now chayiv biur min. Whatever you want to say, or maybe some additional possibility if anyone else has any ideas. Now the question is, picking whichever one of those you want to pick, what will be the machlokas about whether you say time is mavur or not? And keep in mind, like we said at the very beginning, this machlokas is not a machlokas in the world of tam, whether there is such a phenomenon of tam. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel have a notion of tam, and they even have a notion of tam isser. Right? If you had a taroves with pig and cow, they would have an idea of tam, and they would not say tam is mavur. Tam is the question of whether tam is mavur or not is a question here with the chiyuv biur. Okay, so whatever the machlokes is going to be, whichever version of Tam Mavura you pick, you're going to have to ultimately explain why would you or wouldn't you say Tam is Mavur in this context, without obliterating Tam in all contexts, because nobody holds that. Now I want to call you guys' attention to something which should factor into whatever svara we're ultimately going to end up giving. If you remember in Tosfos, the way Tosfos introduces the idea of a machlokes, whether Tam is Mavur or not, is by a havamina that Rabbi Eliezer is saying the pasuk is rejecting. Right? It happens to be that Rabbi Yeshua holds by that havamina, and he uses the drasha that Rabbi Eliezer has to reject that havamina for some other halacha. Okay, let's go back to that havamina for just a second and notice something interesting about why you would think to have that havamina, because when Rabbi Eliezer is fleshing it out, he gives you a sense of where this havamina would come from. Okay, so the Tosfos starts from, one second.
Remember I went to the Tosfos yesterday?
Yeah, I just want to explore a feature of what he said in the havamina. Yisiri says, "V'yesh lomar desavar l'Rabbi Eliezer." You see that in the middle of the Tosfos?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's v'yesh lomar desavar Rabbi Eliezer de'ilav ha'ikra, that if you didn't have this pasuk, namely of v'liv hemtecha, so havamina de'oso hamid dafka yavar v'lo yoser. So what would you think? Your havamina would be the shita of Tam is Mavur, that namely what? That this min dafka, the thing itself, is Mavur, but not more than that. Afal pi shetam ha'isr me'urav behen, even though there is a Tam isr, meaning the Tam from the min, which is now kalu, is me'urav in the other two minim, even though that's true, you'd say it doesn't matter. De lo dami isr debir l'shari surim. Now this is the key point, because the isr bir, why would you think this? The havamina is that you would think this, that you would think the Tam is Mavur. Why would you have had this havamina? So Tosfos is giving you a clue. He says, "Delo dami iser biur l'shar isurim," because the iser of biur is not the same. It's not similar to other isurim. Why? Dahashari la'aniyim, because these foods. And there's also somewhat of a machlokes rishonim, but let's just stick to Tosfos right now. Okay. According to Tosfos, the halacha is those apples which you're chayav to do biur on. If you're an ani, you could eat those apples. You, not being an ani, you can't eat those apples. But an ani could eat those apples. You, being an ani, cannot eat pig. So you see, the isser of biur is different than the isser of shari surim. That's the basis for which Rabbi Eliezer says you would have had a havamina to say that Tam is Mavur. Kamash Malan, he says the pasuk teaches you V'liv Hamtecha to let you know that that's not the case. Okay, and Rabbi Yeshua disagrees and he uses V'liv Hamtecha to teach you something else. But Tosfos is giving you a clue. He's giving you a clue of why you would think this. So the question is, does that help us understand? It may not. It could be that this is not a useful step. But is that in any way helpful in understanding the machlokas?
The ani case?
What was Yaakov's confusion when we first started Shir? He wanted to know, I don't understand. So if Tam is Mavur, according to Rabbi Yeshua, then how does the Tam Heter help you in the two minim that are already Kalu? So we said, you can't say that he holds all Tam as Mavur, and he doesn't have a concept of Tam. When he says Tam is Mavur, factually, he's not referring to the Tam Heter. He's referring to the Tam Isser, from the min which is already Kalu. Okay? So we're specifically talking about the Tam of a min which is Kalu, and therefore Chayev Biur. And we want to know, is that Tam considered Mavuar or not? Now Rabbi Eliezer, in Tosfos' explanation of Rabbi Eliezer, he says, you would have had a havamina that it is different, because the Isser Biur itself is a different kind of an Isser. And that would lead you to thinking that the Tam here might be Mavuar. Kamash Malani holds it's not. But forget what he holds. He's fleshing out the havamina for us a little bit. According to Rabbi Shua, it's a maskana. But the point is, that position is based in some way on the fact that the Isser Biur is a different sort of an Isser than a typical Isser. And for that reason, you might have thought that its Tam should be viewed differently than the normal Tam of any other Isser. So does that give us a clue that we can use? Bill's raising a question. When we're looking about the exception of the uniqueness of the Isser Biur from the fact that it's mutter to the ani, does that mean that we should look at the nature of the heter to the ani for the uniqueness of the Isser Biur, or is the Tosfos simply drawing our attention to the fact that there is an exception, and on that basis the Isser Biur is different, but lav dafka what the exception is? And both of those are logical possibilities. I can't tell you logically you shouldn't or should do one of them.
No, well, Rishon number 2 is safer.
It seems from Tosfos Lashon, the implication is that it's simply the fact that there is an exception indicates to us that there's something different about the Isser Beer. Not lav dafka, or not dafka the fact that it's related to an ani. I mean, again, if your svara ends up incorporating that, so fine, if you could explain that. But I wouldn't feel compelled to have to incorporate that into my svara. Tosfos is just bringing that in as an indication. So now the question that we have is, okay, so the reason you would think that tam should be mavur is because there's something different about the Isser Beer from other Isurim, and therefore the tam, which will be given off by the thing which is Chayev and Beer, will be viewed differently than the tam of anything else which is Asur, like a pig or a treifa or whatever. Okay, so now the question is, what is that difference, and how does that difference translate into the way that we would need to view tam in order to say it's mavuar? Because there's a chiddush here, right? I mean, tam is not normally considered mavuar. So the question we're asking is, based on the clue from Tosfos, what is unique about the Isser Beer? Just take one step about what's unique about the Isser Beer. The Isser Beer really isn't per se an Isser. If you think about it, it's a chiyuv.
To destroy, you mean?
It's a chiyuv to destroy it.
Right.
Now, an Isser to eat this thing is carried along with the chiyuv, meaning because you must destroy this thing, you may not eat it. There's no, because you must destroy this thing, therefore you may not eat it by pig. There's no chiyuv beer dimension to that Isser. It's
right.
just an Isser. Whereas the chiyuv beer, really if you think about it, isn't essentially an Isser. It sort of results in an Isser, but it isn't an Isser.
Does it even result in an Isser?
Practically, yes. But I'm pointing out that conceptually, maybe we shouldn't be looking at it that way.
Say what? How is it really in it? How is it even resulting in it?
It results in an
It
Isser. It results in an Isser because as soon as the chiyuv beer is chal, as applies to it,
Like the second. Let's get annoying. The second, it's shkia.
right? Whenever the status applies, now you may not eat it. It must be destroyed. It's consigned to destruction.
You can't eat it, or it just has to be destroyed.
So I would agree with you. Conceptually, there's a difference there. Practically, you can't eat it. But that's exactly what I'm trying to suggest right now. Is exactly what's bothering you. Exactly that. You're hitting on the point precisely. Is it really that there's an Isser here? Or is it that there's a chiyuv beer, and that chiyuv beer practically means you're not allowed to eat it? Which is not the case by pig.
No, I wouldn't even call it.
Now that we know there's something different about the Isser beer, the question is, does this help us explain why you would or would not view its tam as mavuar? What does this do for us? Because that's ultimately the goal right now, right? We want to define the machlokas about whether tam is mavuar or not. So normally, when you have something which is aser, there's a phenomenon of tam in halacha, and the tam carries with it the properties of the thing that produced the tam. Right? So the tam of the pig carries with it the same shem iser that the actual physical substance of the pig carried with it. So if the tam of the pig goes into something else, that shem iser goes with it. So now, with this idea of the Isser beer being a different sort of an Isser than a normal Isser achila, can we explain at all? Do we have any more ability to think about the machlokas of whether to view tam as mavuar or not from the min, which was kalu? What do you guys say? Tamir is pointing out another distinction by the chiyuv beer, is that the chalo shem iser by a pig is always there. As long as this is a pig, its status as a davar aser is present. Okay? Whereas when it comes to the min, which is kalu, there's a transition. First the min was mutter, and then when that day on the calendar arrives, suddenly now there's a chiyuv beer. So there's a transition which takes place here. That's another, you're absolutely right, that's another distinction. How does that affect the way we would view the tam?
But that's not.
I'll just read this line in Tosfos. Right after Tosfos said the Havamina from the Ani, he says what? He says the lo dami iser de bir de lashar isurim da shari laniyim v'havamina de nachshavel kemavuar. You would think to view it therefore as if it's destroyed, and then he adds this key line: kevan she'ein kan ela hatam. Since all we have here is tam. Now, what does that line mean? Because on the one hand, what do you mean all we have here is tam? I can definitively say that about every time we're talking about tam. All we have here is tam. And that's perfectly sufficient in every other area of kashrus. So there's something about the fact that this is quote-unquote only tam, which is significant because, and allows us to say, well, we're just going to view it as if it's mavuar, because this isser is a different sort of an isser. But what do you mean? By other isurim, we don't say, well, it's only tam. We say, yeah, it's only tam, and this is the properties of tam. What do you mean it's only tam? How does that, what's Tosfos adding with that? Again, he's hinting at something. All right, so let's see if we can take a stab at this. All right, so the place that we're at now is the following. We want to understand why you should view the tam of the min which is kalu as mavuar. We understand why you shouldn't view it that way, because that would be viewing it as the same tam as any davar shel iser, right? That's standard. The question is, why would you view it differently? So Tosfos indicated to us that the reason you would is because this is a different sort of an iser than a normal iser. And we made a number of observations as to how. We said, first of all, really this isn't an iser per se, it's really a chiyuv bir that carries with it an iser, as opposed to a normal davar shel iser. Right? We also Tamir pointed out that there's a transition which takes place. So now the tam might be viewed as different for whatever reason. We don't know, but there's some unique feature here of transition which doesn't happen by a normal davar shel iser. So there are things which we can point to. The question is, how does that translate into the way we're going to view tam as mavuar? So maybe you could say like this. And there's a little bit of an abstract point, so we're going to take it slow, and we'll see if we can get through this. Normally, and this is going to get to what you were talking about 2 days ago in Shir, about the idea of something being chal. Okay, so normally we say that the chalos shem iser, right, the status of an iser, and that's what chalos shem is, a status. Okay, that the status of an iser is chal. The status applies; it falls upon a certain substance based on the identity of that substance. Right? So, behema tamea is identified in the Torah as something which has a chalos shem iser. Right? That's the definition the Torah gives those categories of animals. Okay. So here, what do we have? We have a chalos shem bir, which is applying to the min when this special day on the calendar arrives. Now the question is, how do we look at this chalos shem? Is it just another chalos shem iser? In which case, the normal rules of tam and everything that normally applies will apply as usual, which is what Rabbi Eliezer holds. Or do we say that the chalos shem bir, while it is a chalos shem, is a different sort of chalos shem because it takes into account the characteristic of the chalos shem. In other words, we take into account the character, the quality of what status we're applying when we apply it. Okay, what do I mean? I mean like this. Normally a chalos shem iser does what? Chalos shem iser says, take whatever it is you're talking about, whatever you're applying this status to, and say this thing is now aser. That's it. Okay? But the chiyuv bir isn't just a status, it's a status with a particular character, namely the character of bir. Okay? Now the question that the Tanoim are raising is this question. Do you say that the character of the chalos changes what that chalos is? Or is a chalos, and it doesn't matter what the particular character is, you just apply it? So what's the nafkamina? This case is a nafkamina. If you say it's a different sort of a chalos, so then the fact that it is a chalos of biur is relevant. What does biur mean? Biur means that it must be destroyed. So halacha comes to this physical substance of the actual food itself, not the tam, the food itself, and says this substance, in halacha's eyes, is viewed as needing to be destroyed. Okay? The thing is, when it comes to tam is not a physical entity. Okay? And I'll address the obvious question of, but I can taste tam in just a second. In halacha, tam is a conceptual category. Right? There's many halachas which bear that out, because sometimes you could taste something and we don't care about it. Okay? The fact, for instance, ben yomo is an example of that. Right? We consider tam to be livgam after. We have all these rules that we're imposing onto the culinary reality of what you do or don't taste. Okay, so you see that the halachic idea of tam is a conceptual idea. So now you have two things. You have the food itself, which isn't just a conceptual idea that physically exists, okay? And then you also have the tam. So now the question that Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel are raising is this. When you have a chalosh shem of biur, and you apply that to something, does the characteristic of biur go with it? And if it does, they claim it would be meaningless to talk about the tam of such a thing. Because since the tam is itself only a conceptual entity, there's nothing there to destroy. Because the whole chiyuv of destroying on the substance is that this thing should not exist anymore. But if the tam doesn't have any physical existence, how are you going to destroy it? It's already considered to be destroyed in halacha's eyes.
I kind of get you just clarifying that this thing should be destroyed, but it is not destroyed yet, and therefore why is the tam destroyed? Tam should be destroyed.
Right.
But so just to clarify, you have to make some of these moves like.
How do you get from should to is?
Right. You have to do some like
I'm saying the reason
doesn't register. You have to do some funky.
I'm saying the way that works.
I hear the opening, but how do you?
Is because of this idea that there's a difference between the tam and the mamashos of the min. The mamashos, the substance of the min, physically exists. So a chiyuv biur, as applied to that substance, is a should, not an is.
But for whatever reason, the should disqualifies the extension of tam.
But the tam is only a conceptual entity. So when you apply a chiyuv biur to a conceptual entity, there's nothing to destroy. There's nothing that exists in reality. It's just a conceptual entity. So therefore, in their opinion, the chalosh shem biur cannot produce an idea of tam. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer is going to say, I don't care that the character of the chalos is biur. It's a chalos. It's a chalos like any other chalos. So when you apply it, it applies and it gives the thing that you're applying it to a status of biur. So therefore, is there normally a phenomenon of tam? Yes, therefore, there is tam, and it's not considered mavur. That's the question of the machlokas. Do you view the chalos shem as a status, regardless of the character of that status, or does the character of that status influence the status itself and its ability to be applied to whatever it is that you're applying it to?
Okay, so I kind of get it. I just want to ask a question.
Right, so Dylan's asking, why do we view the tam as not having this chalos? Okay, you should destroy the tam. So I'm saying that you could view the tam as receiving the chalos, but it can't really have the action of destruction performed on it. How are you going to destroy tam? You could hide tam, you could add a lot of other flavors, right? But it's not really subject to destruction. So now the question is, how do you...
destruction.
Right, so now you have a problem. You're trying to apply a status of the need for destruction to something which isn't destructible. Right. So the halacha says that the sum of that is that the tam is now considered as if it's destroyed. It gains that status. There's no maisa you need to do to give it that status, because what maisa would you do?
Okay, so I thought you were trying to go some other route. Because in the second question, really the first one is, how do you get from should be to is?
Right, so maybe this is a better way of putting it. I hear.
No. So I think that takes care of the tam is separate from the fruit, but I don't really get how you handle should to is. I thought you were going to go some route like, since it somehow, because it gets the status of should be chayiv and biur for whatever reason, that disqualifies the extension of tam.
Not that it disqualifies the extension. No, it's that I think the chiyuv biur applied to the phenomenon of tam generates a status of it's considered as if it's destroyed. Because how are you going to do the act of destruction to that?
No, I hear the idea that you can't apply a chiyuv biur to tam, but how is the tam get? How does the extension of mushroms to tam get destroyed?
I'd say like this. In the same way that Tamir raised the point earlier about how there's a transition, right? The food goes from not being chayiv and biur to now being chayiv and biur. So I'd say that when applied, that transition, when applied to the physical substance, generates a chiyuv maisa on your part. You have to destroy this thing now. But since you can't do that to tam, what are you going to do? How are you going to destroy the tam? Okay, that transition generates this change, that it's now considered as if it is destroyed. That's what the transition does for the tam, according to them.
I think I got it. Not your words.
Dylan wants to know, how does a should become an is? Meaning, okay, you have a chiyuv biur, so this thing should be destroyed. But how is it destroyed? So I think maybe we shouldn't think about the chiyuv as a should. Okay? I don't think that's the right way to think about it. Chiyuv biur means that this chefza has a certain... I'll give you an example. I'll give you a raya, okay? So you have a halacha by ir nidachas, okay? By ir nidachas, so everything in the city has to be burned. Everything has to be destroyed. Now, there's a case they take up in Sukkah. What happens if you take a lulav from an ir nidachas for your mitzvah, or you yotzei? So now, based on the premise of your question of a difference between should and is, you would say you should be yotze, right? Why not? Okay, it's true you shouldn't be using this lulav because this lulav should be used for destruction.
But doesn't mean you can't.
But doesn't mean you can't because it is here. Should isn't it is. Yet the halacha is, it's as if you did nothing. You did not do your mitzvah. Because the chiyuv of hashchasa, the chiyuv of hashchasa,
that's what I was kind of saying. Okay, yeah,
right,
yeah.
isn't just an obligation to do something. It imposes a status of needing to be destroyed, and you have an obligation to make that status manifest.
Right. And consequently, there is an irremovable usher. You're right, because exactly what you're saying is, in my case, you would be able to get out of it and do some weird sort of like, well, it's here, it wasn't burned, I could use it.
Right.
No, it's not that. It's affixed to the chiyuv, or somehow tied, just like.
So the chiyuv isn't just a should, right? It's not just a should. It imposes a certain status of destroyed on it that you must carry out.
Oh, okay. And exactly what you did before. Is it that